All right, this is our lesson for 1B, lesson 4. This is on proportions, and we're also going to talk a little bit about word problems as well. And we're basically going to be solving multi-step equations again. This is just an application of what you were doing last lesson. So we've got a warm-up. I'm going to talk a little bit about the homework. We're going to review some special cases and three-step equations. We're going to focus on proportions. That's going to be our main thing for today. We are going to look at word problems, but more as a tool for reviewing for people who still need to go back and retake tests from 1A. And then we're going to work on class in proportions, and you'll finish that up at home. And there'll be that quick little exit ticket / quiz at the end. So there was some questions that people had to do for Virtual Monday as well that was based on perimeter. So perimeter is when you add all the sides together. What you'll notice is from the picture, they only labeled 2 of the 4 sides. But when they wrote the question down, or when they wrote their answer down, they put 4 sides here. Clearly the top is the same as the bottom, and the right is the same as the left. So it's really important though, although they didn't label these sides, possibly you do, and certainly make sure if it's a 4-sided shape that you're adding 4 things together. Now for questions like this one then, I've added this in. I actually added in the extra side here, and I added in the extra side because I know these are going to be the same. So as we write it down, it doesn't particularly matter where you start. If I start from the bottom, I got x plus 5. On the left, I got x minus 1. On the top, I got x plus 5. And on the bottom, I got x minus 1. So I'm adding those all together. Now, they did that here and came up with this answer. But sometimes it's not so clear to do that when they're all alongside each other like that. So what I've done is, and I deliberately put these in different colors to highlight the numbers, but also the variables. So if I actually split these up, then this is a little easier to do. So if I just look at my x terms, remember x means 1x. So 1x, 2x, 3x, 4x. That's where they got this from here. And at the bottom, be careful. Although we're adding things together, this is a negative number at this point. So it's not 5 add 1, it's 5 add negative 1, which is 4. Add 5 is 9, take away 1 is 8, positive 8, so we can put that together. So when we've got our questions and they're all in a row like this, you might just want to think about separating them out a little bit into 2 parts just to make your adding a little bit easier. Now also with perimeter as well, sometimes they don't give all the sides. So on this picture here, this was the T-shape here, there's actually 3 sides that they didn't give the length for. So we actually have to work those out before we start. We certainly don't just add the ones that you can see here. We've got to add every side together. Notice this side, of course, is the same as this side, so that would be 3a. And for part 2, notice this side is clearly the same as this side, so that would be 5a. And this one's not quite as easy to work out, but notice it's a combination of this plus this plus this. So if this is 3a, we got another 3a here and another 3a here. We can actually work out that this is 9a, and then we can actually answer this question. So if we add all the sides together, I went around the shape this way this time. Fill in those numbers that we just worked out for those answers, and then add those together. A lot of you put 17a, because that's just excuse me, that's just these sides here. But you've also got to add in these extra distances as well. So just make sure you're filling in every distance when you do perimeter. That's a very common question for the SOL where they don't give you sides and they're hoping that you're going to put this answer here by just adding the sides that you did. Now, our warm-up today was focused on those word problem aspects. So take a few minutes, pause the video, and see if you can try these questions. All right, welcome back. So 3 times a number, that just means 3x or 3n or whatever you want to put. Plus 7 means I'm adding 7. Equals, or they could say is as well, but equals this time. The same number, so that means we'd put x. If it's at a different number, you'd put y, but we're not going to solve equations with 2 different letters right now. Minus 5 obviously means subtract 5. So to practice our 3-step equations from this, we want to bring all our variables to the left-hand side. So you'd want to subtract x from both sides because we're doing opposites. I did notice on some people's homeworks, people noticed this was negative x, but then they put this was positive x. So make sure you're doing the same thing on both sides as well here. Once we've got all our variables on one side, bring the numbers to the opposite side. So this positive 7, do subtract 7, and then work out what that gives you. And our last step, once we have it like this, 2x just means times by 2. So the opposite is to divide by 2, and then just use your calculator just to check what the answer should be. And our second warm-up question, 4 times the sum of a number and 6. So this will also go back to help people who need to retake that section 1 on verbal expressions. So 4 times, so I'm writing it next to each other because I'm timesing it. As soon as I see sum, I know I need that plus symbol. And then we just put either side what it says, a number and 6. Equals a number doubled less than 10. This was another one that people missed. This less than, they know it means subtract, but it also means you've got to do a turnaround on this or a flip. So the 2x, the number doubled, that comes at the end, and you're making it less than 10. So 10 is actually your first thing you wrote down. A lot of you still are putting 2x minus 10, so be careful on those ones. Less than, more than, subtracted from are the most common ones where you're going to turn the phrase around. Of course, with parentheses, this is 4-step. This is what we were doing last lesson. Distribute 4 times x, 4 times 6. Make sure you're doing 4 times 6. Still a lot of people putting 4x plus 6 here. Very common mistake. Bring all your x's to one side. So instead of subtracting 2x, do the opposite. And when you add 4x, add 2x, you get 6x. And obviously this cancels as well. Bring things away from the x. So instead of adding 24, take away 24. And that will cancel here. And then instead of timesing by 6, divide by 6. Don't go immediately for the calculator, or if you do and get a decimal, make sure you go back and change it and simplify it as a fraction. If you divide both of these numbers by 2, you'd end up with -7/3. So the homework from last lesson was to work through these 8 questions and then try any 2 questions down here, so you had a total of 10. I went for the last question in section B. I know not a lot of people would have tried this question, which is one of the reasons I picked it, but also just to emphasize those key steps while we're doing these types of questions. So the main thing is still that distributive property. Some people are still doing that 4 times 2 and then writing subtract 3x. So make sure you times the 4 by both terms here. When we get to this middle term here, and I put them in different colors just to kind of show you're breaking it into a separate question, make sure you times it by -6 here. And then -6 times -4 is going to give you +24. Same thing over here, more parentheses, so 2 times 5, 2 times -5x, and we write it down. So it's just the fact that there's 3 distributives rather than just one in one question. Now, a lot of x terms on here, but we also have some x terms on the same side. So I actually did the commutative rule here from your propertives the other day. I changed the order that I'm adding and subtracting things. So I put all my x's at the start, and then 8 is obviously just +8, and then I put my numbers at the end here. And the reason I did that, I'm hoping that's going to make this a little easier for us to add terms here, or subtract in some cases. -12 take away 6, -18. 8 add 24, 32. Notice I'm not doing the opposite of -6x, because I'm not moving it to the other side of the equation. I'm just connecting with a term that's already on the same side. From here, we can start doing opposites, so move my x's to the left. Instead of subtracting 10x, I can add 10x. Once I have my x's by themselves, bring your numbers to the other side. And then last step is always to divide. 2 negatives are going to make a positive, and then just see if that fraction simplifies. And try and avoid 2.75 if you can for the decimals. We want to leave it in fractions when we get to our unit later on slope. So today's lesson specifically, we said we were going to talk about word problems. Every lesson we do that quick reminder though of special cases. Remember, if you see one number equals the same number, we're going to put infinite solutions. And if you have a number equals a different number, then you're going to say that's no solution. And those types of questions happen when we have the x's on both sides. Like the question you can see here, when I distribute, I get 6x and 6x. So I know that they're going to cancel. And then 2 equals 12. They're different numbers. 2 does not equal 12, so no solution. And then we can carry on. Now, before we get onto proportions, which I generally consider as fractions, we're going to just focus on one where we have one fraction here. So remember what the fraction bar means. The fraction bar means we're going to divide. So instead of dividing by 3, if I want to move it to the side, I'm going to do the opposite. So I'm going to times both sides by 3. The 3's would cancel on this side, just leaving us this, which is basically what I want. And then 9 times 3 is 27. So kind of like when you've got questions with parentheses. If we've got questions with fractions, they're going to be a lot more difficult. So it's a lot easier just to multiply by that denominator on both sides, and then you end up with something much nicer to work with. Now, I put parentheses here, which might seem totally unnecessary, but when we do our questions later, it's going to be really important that we do that, so I'm just establishing a good habit right now. And then from here, just a two-step equation. Add 1 to both sides, divide by 2. Fairly simple question, but that first step is going to be the important one. Certainly we don't want to be adding 1 to both sides, because technically this is not a negative 1. Actually, it's a negative 1/3 if we look at all of this. So it's better to get rid of that fraction first when we do those types of questions. Now, the real question was this. So proportion, I think of generally as fraction equals fraction. And when I see fraction equals fraction, actually, some people often remember, and I'm not sure if people do remember this one from middle school, particularly in 2020 with missing some time, cross multiply. We're going to do this times this equals this times this. And I actually kind of like to write the arrows in just to remind myself that's exactly what I'm going to be doing. And also just to remind myself which two things I'm multiplying. Now, it doesn't particularly matter which one you do first, but I tend to do this times this. I tend to find that makes the question a little bit easier. Or you can write it the other way around as well. You can say this times this. It doesn't make too much difference. Equals this times this. So basically, I'm moving the denominators up to the other side, and then instead of dividing by these numbers, I'm going to times by these numbers. So that's that cross multiply thing. This times this equals this times this. And when we distribute, I deliberately wrote it this way, I believe, because people get confused when the number's not at the start. It's still the same idea, guys. You still do 5 times 2x, and you still do 5 times negative 1. But sometimes when it's written the other way around, that can confuse people. So I want to make sure we saw that. And obviously 3 times 10 is 30. And we've done the hard part of the question already now. This first step was knowing that you needed to cross multiply. And then from here, we're kind of just onto a two-step. Add 5 to both sides. Divide both sides by 10, and just check if you can simplify, which you can for this question. For our next one, same thing. I want to do this times this equals this times this. I made this one just a little bit more complicated. I put an extra x term in this one. The last question, I only had one term that had an x in it. So this time I made sure I got 2 terms that have x's in. So this times this equals this times this, however which way you want to write it down. I wrote it the other way around just to practice. 2 times 5x, 2 times 1. And on the other side, 3 times 2x, and 3 times negative 3. If we have x's on both sides, remember we want to move our x's to the left. So instead of this positive 6x, I want to do negative 6x. And move the numbers away from the x. So instead of adding 2, you can subtract 2. And then that last step, instead of timesing by 4, you can divide by 4. And we'll just leave that as a fraction, as it doesn't actually simplify. And as we talked about several lessons ago, you're not going to be able to do these questions by guessing anymore. So it's really important that you go through those steps of writing down the opposites, lining up your equal signs, and then it's a fairly logical process. So the only new step today actually is when we see this fraction versus fraction, knowing that you're going to do this times this equals this times this. And that was your key multi-step equation from the previous lesson. So we're only actually adding in one extra step. For that original question, if you want, instead of writing it as 9, if you prefer, you can write it as 9 over 1, and then it's actually still a fraction question. Proportions question, sorry. Of course, anything times 1 is just itself, and then 3 times 9 is 27. And the rest of the answer you can go back and look at. But just an idea, if you don't like that original question, change it into a proportion, and then you know you can answer that. On Canvas, you're going to see these questions here. They're going to be grouped into 6 at a time, and basically you have 6 questions, all 6 answers given, and you have to match them up. So if your answer doesn't appear, you know you've gone wrong, and you can probably get some help. I did want to emphasize sometimes we're going to switch from word problems, again, like we did in the warm-up, so be particularly careful on questions where it says less than. So 14 less than, remember that means you're going to put negative 14, you're not putting 14 minus. And similarly on number 25, where it says 17 is 13 subtracted from, so 17 is our 17 equals, 13 subtracted from 6 times a number, so that's one of those flip words again, so it's going to be 6x minus 13, and then you can just go ahead and solve the question as normal. And that will do it for this one. That's your main thing on proportions. Remember to do that cross multiplying trick, that's kind of like really important for these questions. But yeah, use those Canvas answers to help you. If you don't see your particular answer, that's probably where you need to get a little bit of help. And that's actually pretty much it for this unit. The next lesson is actually going to just be some review of questions, including our test review. But in terms of new content, this is it. So if you've still found something that you need extra help with, this is the week to come and get some help.